Hey folks, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady, and our other guest is Dr. Eric Tait. And this is going to be an interesting episode, predominantly because while we focus on really physician journeys here, part of that journey is a shift in your perspective and a shift in your belief systems and a shift in your mindset. And one of the most challenging ones when it comes to kind of designing and creating the practice in life that you want as a physician comes around money. And this is it can be a challenging conversation for some people, depending on what your upbringing may be and what your preconceived beliefs about pain, or not pain, but pain. You can tell my pain physician's part, I'm looping out of this stuff. Pain and money, I guess, are linked hand in hand, but really what your attitudes about money are, is we're going to talk to Dr. Tait about your mindset and how it relates to money. And so I really advise you to pay a lot of attention to this. Money is one of those topics that we tend to not want to talk about, but your mindset when it comes to money can be really crucial to your financial future. So Dr. Tait, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you all for having me again. I truly appreciate it. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. And I'm thinking maybe to start off, unless Kevin, you have something you want to start with, I think it's good to maybe start with what are the typical beliefs that hinder human beings in this world? Maybe just start with that. What is it that, maybe some preconceived notions that may be inaccurate?
Around money or just in general?
Money. Yeah, that can apply for a lot of things.
A lot of it is that we find in terms of our investors who come to us, what we find oftentimes is that money is often security. For people, they equate money and security hand in hand, and that there oftentimes is a feeling of lack around money. And so and I don't want to overly generalize because it's not always the same for everyone, but what you will often see is people who grew up in households that did lack or did have money issues. You will see a lot of emotionality around money as it relates to back to that security mindset. And so you'll see oftentimes very conservative, what they consider to be conservative uses of their money, high savings rates, which aren't necessarily a bad thing, but an inability to spend money and use money as a tool, which is kind of the big thing that we kind of work with our investors to think about, is that money is just a tool, right? Especially for those of us who are physicians, because we can always make more money. We have unemployment by choice. And so as long as we're willing to work, we can always get paid, right? And, the big thing that we talk about is always having your disability insurance in place, because once you've insured your income, we can always make money, right? And so around that, from that standpoint, the biggest thing is kind of that lack mentality, or what we could call scarcity mentality, kind of in the personal development game, is that they hold on to a dollar so tightly because they know what it's like to not have, and to be lacking, and a fear of the future. And that is probably the most common thing. The flip side is the profligate side, right? Those who've had money, who grew up secure, and who don't properly respect money. And what I mean by that is, yes, we as physicians can always go out and make more of it, but also understand that when we do that with our time, we are literally giving up a portion of our life to do that. Mm-hmm. And so when the respect factor comes in is, hey, unless this money's being made while you're sleeping, you are sacrificing something at this point to get it. And so the flip side is the gambler's mentality. And so people will get into a lot of investments that don't make a lot of sense, or quote unquote gambling, or they don't think consciously about how they're allocating their money. And it's just profligate, right? And so we're with those investors, we try to have a more mindset around consciousness around your spending. Like, okay, you are spending this money, especially around investing, let's just say, either investing or putting money into your business, or, let's just say those two things. Ultimately, think about it from a conscious standpoint. Why is it that you are doing this exact thing for this exact particular reason? Not because somebody came up to you with a great idea, or someone just came up to you and you felt pity for them. How is it working in your overall goal in terms of what you're trying to accomplish for your life? And so those are the two kind of, I would say, ends of the spectrum in terms of what we see. And then most people are somewhere in between that, depending on kind of how they've worked themselves from a personal development standpoint.
Yeah, it seems like there's, it just reaffirms that whatever your beliefs are, they tend to dictate your behavior. And so those choices are being made, and you're wanting people to have an awareness to understand what those beliefs are, so that if they can make sure their behaviors are in alignment with their ultimate goals down the road. I think that's, there's several things I could pull out from that, including the disability and stuff. We could probably talk about that a little bit later. Any thoughts, Kevin, about what he said?
So I think it's interesting because you have these kind of two extremes. You have the scarce mentality where they're gripping onto it as much as they can. Then they have the gambler's mentality where it's just like, oh, we're going to throw it to, not really think about the purpose of it. But I also think maybe there may be a third wing to this as well, and that may be actually your perception of what money is by yourself. And what I mean by that is some of us were raised in such a way, depending on what your upbringing may be, where you almost view money as a bad thing. Like maybe you were perceiving people with high net worth to be evil individuals, and so there may be an uncomfortableness around a discussion about money. And I think that becomes important because as you start trying to take control of your life, your finances, your practice, or whatever, you have to actually start getting comfortable with the relationship you have with money and that value exchange. And I'm speaking probably, like everything, my own personal, that's probably my own background with it. And one of the things when I was in a traditional practice and I didn't have to worry about billing, that was different. It's like, hey, let's schedule you for a $6,000 procedure. Now, when it's me doing one-on-one interaction, I'm doing consulting, and then I have to scale this value and say, how much am I going to charge, or how, and be willing to stand by that. That's a very, very different relationship now. And again, from a personal standpoint, I've found my own beliefs around money has interfered greatly with that and actually been detrimental to both parties, myself and whoever I'm working with.
Oh, now that's a whole different can of worms right now. So now we're talking about now we're talking about cultural overlays and what we inherit from our parents and our culture and our religions, right? And so that's a very different. Yeah, we can have a whole long conversation about that, right? And the self-sabotage that people often will have for themselves when they have an uneasy relationship with money, and so that they have a self-perception of what money is, that rich people are evil and people who have money did something illegal to do it, or they somehow cheated people out of it. And so they will put their own psychological lid on their earning capacity because they don't feel like they're worthy, or they feel that if they do get to those levels that they are somehow bad. That is literally a deconditioning process that literally people have to go through to undo that mindset. And it's interesting. A big paradigm shift for me was, and not that I ever thought that people with money were evil, but a big paradigm shift with me was when someone said that the person who has one house and just puts money into a 401k and just puts money into a 529 for their kids is extremely selfish. And the person who goes out there and creates a business and hires other people and puts money into other people's projects and provides housing for other people are actually the most generous people in the world, because they're looking out for other people, as opposed to those who are just looking insular to themselves and their own familial unit. And so there's a way that we can flip this, especially with all of the vilification that's happening with capitalism right now. And people don't really realize that all capitalism, what true free market capitalism is serving the needs of other people. Money comes from other people. Money doesn't come from the government. The government may print it, but they rarely are giving it out to people, right? Money comes from other people, and the value you give those other people, they will then give you money in return. And so I promise you, there's nobody out there going to give you money unless you've given them some amount of value. And those that have given the most value, the scorecard is, in many ways, outside of those who work on Wall Street, because they just give money off other people's accounts. But for those who run real businesses, the scorecard of the amount of value you give is the amount of money that you make. Now, what you do with it is a different discussion at a different time. But making money is never, well, let me not say never evil, but if you're doing a service for other people that they want, and you get paid goo gobs worth of money for it, you are adding value in the world to other people, right? And I think, and explaining that to people, it sometimes will change their mentality around who they look at and how they look at people, right? Right now, Jeff Bezos is being vilified, right? Well, I'm sorry, he's going to be a trillionaire because we're all at home ordering stuff online. Now, you may say, I don't like his business practices, he doesn't pay his workers enough, or this, that, and the other. But he is providing you a valuable service that you are partaking of, right? That's why he's as wealthy as he is, because he provided a service. He's not somebody who inherited his money or anything like that. And most millionaires in the United States actually did not inherit their money, which is a fallacy that people don't really understand. Most people in the United States actually made their money themselves by providing us a service or a good. And so, yeah, that we can have a long conversation about that mentality around kind of is wealth evil.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm kind of interested in having a little bit more of that conversation here, just because I would like to hear your guys, everybody else right here on this, what your experiences with other physicians are, because I feel like as physicians, oftentimes part of our training is this idea that we forget that value equation. And there's this idea that somehow, and maybe it's because of the employed practice model, and again, we're sort of separate from the whole billing conversation, and a lot of people have no idea what anything is charged, and they don't see that. But again, from my standpoint and from other physician friends, people have a hard time. Like we just believe we're supposed to give everything away for free, and it's like, well, you're a doctor, and you're just doing it for the good of humanity, so you should just be willing to give everything out in the world for free. And I go, maybe it's my little cocoon here, but have you guys seen that with other physicians, or is that just the people that I know?
Melissa, you want, because yes, I can give you.
No, you go ahead. I'll chime in a minute.
So the DPC and the cash pay docs, no, they don't have that issue at all, right? The problem is the payment model. And anybody who knows me knows that I rail against the payment model, right? Well, let me not say that I rail against it, because it's a model that's been chosen, right? But the payment model determines the delivery model, right? And so we have a model where our clients, our customers, our patients do not pay us. And so there's a delinking and a decoupling of the value we provide from the perception of what that value is from the people we actually provide the services to. Because they've been trained by insurance companies and the government that they just pay their $25 copay and everything should be given to them, right? Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not making a value judgment on it, but that's just the training that most people who are patients have received. And as physicians, yes, our altruism is taken advantage of in many ways. But again, we are insulated from the actual costs of what it is that we do to patients in many ways, unless you're a cash pay patient, unless you're a cash pay practice, which at that point, you get very clear very quickly, if you're going to stay in business, what your value proposition is in the marketplace vis-a-vis your competition and vis-a-vis the patients who come through your doors. And so we are lulled to sleep in many ways because we're in the third party's payment model, because essentially there's a limit on the services that we provide, irrespective of specialty. And so in some ways you can just hang a shingle up, get a job somewhere, and patients are going to ultimately come, right? It's one of those things. If they don't, just move a little further out, and then you'll have all the patients that you want. And so most physicians really aren't business people, even those who are in private practice, in many ways, unless they're in a cash business. If they're in a cash business, they are absolutely in business and they absolutely understand their value proposition. And they will quickly learn that the more value that they provide, the higher they can charge for their services within reason to what they're giving other people. But the average physician who's not in that kind of practice has never been trained and is completely divorced from actually providing value to their clients in a way that they can feel the automatic feedback, because essentially we're in a price fixed industry. That's why I tell people third party payment medicine is not a business. It's an indentured servitude because it's price fixed. And so you don't get any of the natural feedback, market feedback to understand. That's why a doctor who's horrible versus a doctor who's great is going to get paid the same. There's no one in the industry that does that, right? And so we are lulled into this sense of not really understanding the value that we do provide. And I think, sadly, many physicians would be shocked to understand, because I've done the research, I've seen the research, would be shocked to understand that most patients don't value highly monetarily what it is that we actually do.
Yeah, they tend to put, like to expand on that. And especially in the pain world, we can reference that, but there tends to be value placed on things that really don't create great value for them and outcomes. Without going into a lot of detail. But I also think about how, I always feel like there's always been that, since fellowship, felt like there was a curtain where we couldn't see, there was no real understanding and transparency of the value or the cost and all how that interplays. But the worst part about it, and this doesn't happen in really any other industry, is that there's a decreased value when you look at the monetary reimbursement that physicians get over time. It seems like it decreases over time versus, with inflation or whatever you want to add into that calculation, that it just doesn't make any sense. And so we're not surprised that there's, whether it's burnout, moral injury, or whatever, we're being decoupled not only from what the true cost value is, but from our true reason for going into medicine and feeling like we're being served and feeling like we're making a difference or having relationships and connections with people. That's being devalued by the system, so that you don't really feel like you have the time to even talk to your patient and create a relationship. So,
But
that
gets back to our earlier conversation though, right? Because we have set, many physicians in our mind, we have set what we think that we are worth, quote unquote. You hear that all the time. Know your worth, know your worth. And I try to disabuse physicians of that notion. Your economic worth is determined by the people who pay you, not what you think your worth is, unless you're going to go cash. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a third-party payment model, the insurance companies and the government tell you what your economic worth is. So there's really not a know your worth. They're telling you what your worth is. You're not going to know your worth until you actually put your value out to people to pay for it in cash. Mm-hmm. That's when you know what your ultimate worth is, right? And so that's back to our earlier conversation about expectation setting, right? What can we control and what can we not control? Physicians will never again control the payment model in the third-party system. So we can forget about that. Stop fighting those battles. It's a waste of everyone's time and effort. We're not going to control that. What we can control is where we get our money from, and whether or not that's going to be us leaving medicine, doing things outside of medicine, using our capital we've already created to create income streams for us. And that's just, people have to begin to think about that in medicine from an autonomy standpoint, because we're not going to get that value-based autonomy inside medicine from our profession. We're going to have to find that somewhere else.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that's such that idea of then thinking in terms of value propositions, whether it is in your clinical practice or in your external investments or your external, how you want to apply your information becomes so crucial for physicians to start thinking about. Because if you just, if you're thinking for some reason that if you're in a traditional healthcare model that you are going to be paid for value, just like you said, Eric, it's never going to happen ever again, because there's this total disalignment between who is the value exchange. There's no exchange of value anymore. You have the insurance company, right? So you have a patient's paying an insurance company. The insurance company is paying the hospital or clinician, and then the clinician's delivering the service to the patient. So there's a complete absence and disconnect between this exchange of value anymore. So I don't want to make it seem like, patients are demanding. If you're paying $1,500 a month on an insurance premium, and then you're going and seeing your doctor, and as you were hinting earlier, one of the biggest values that a physician has is our ability to reassure, to tell you what isn't there. And then the doctor says, all you need is chicken soup. You don't have COVID or you don't have whatever. They're like, well, I'm paying $1,500 a month for you to tell me I don't need anything. And so this idea of disconnect in value and value propositions that are not, I just think it's really important for physicians to understand that, because then if you're seeking from your patients and you're getting upset at your patients demanding extra services, flip the idea of what the patient has been investing their money in, and kind of consider, would you be wanting to pay $1,500 a month? And you might, if you have enough knowledge and awareness around the subjects, but $1,500 a month, that someone walk into somebody's office and they say, hey, you're going to be fine. You just need some chicken soup, or maybe need to walk every day. That's a very different sort of conversation to have. Yep.
And to take it one step further, so physicians are absolutely clear, those that are in the third party payment model, where we sit as a labor component in the system. The money that flows through this system is either taxpayer dollars or shareholder money. Okay. That's it, right? Corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. not their members who own their insurance policies, and not to us as the workers. We're all paying taxes, and no one wants to pay more in taxes. So anytime you're voting for a tax cut, you're voting essentially for, as a physician, you're voting essentially for a wage cut, or at least a wage cap, so that money will then have to be redistributed within the system across multiple entities. And so there's going to be a fight for a smaller pot of money. So understand that we are either a taxpayer expense or a shareholder expense in the great grand scheme of this whole thing, to give you a clear understanding of the money that's in the system to pay us, where it's going, whose pockets it's going from, or whose pockets it's not going into. And think about who has the stronger lobbies when it comes to those things.
That's a good point there. Who's got the big lobby?
Yeah. I mean, that really is kind of pulling out bird's eye view, and a good thing to remember. I almost feel like this question I have is really could be another episode, and we can maybe dive deeper later, but what is kind of your general message with disability insurance for physicians? Like absolutely must have, or depending on the amount you're making, or what you're doing on and other non-medical things, or what's your feeling?
So I'll back it out Socratically, right?
Sure.
Those of us in medicine, for the most part, are literally qualified, if we weren't practicing medicine, to teach high school biology. Most of us, right? Most of us will build a lifestyle that will be between 30 to 90% of our income is going to go to our life expenses, right? So if we're no longer able to practice medicine, and the next viable job that we're really, really qualified for, and don't get lucky doing something else, is going to be high school biology or something like that, there's a huge pay discrepancy there, right? Mm-hmm. And so my argument to almost all of my investors, and many times I try to tell them, you can't invest with me unless you have your disability insurance in place already, right? Because that, when you have kids' life insurance and disability insurance, right? Because we have such specialized skill sets that your own occupation disability insurance, ideally when you're in residency to get your first policy from, I think there are like 6 companies out there that really do reputable own occupation policies. That is kind of the foundational portion of your financial future, right? I don't understand why people have life insurance before they have kids. You need disability insurance. As soon as you're done practicing, as soon as you're about to be, as soon as you're going into an attending world, disability insurance. First thing off the bat. So that's my stance on it. That's how I set up my life. My wife set up her life, because we're so specialized. It's not easy for us to then move in and do something else that will pay us roughly the same.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think that I would hope that more residents are hearing that, because it is so much less expensive as a resident. And residents are often cash strapped, it is, but it becomes, when you're looking 5-10 years down the line, all of a sudden someone's telling you you need disability insurance as a physician, it gets really pricey, that decision to not pursue it in residency.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions, Dr. Cuccaro or Kevin?
Dr. Cuccaro or Kevin?
I was going to say Kevin and then said Dr. Cuccaro, so formal.
Not too many, but I guess I would ask you, Eric, is if you had to think of one mindset about money that has provided the most transformative difference for you personally, and we know there's all different types of beliefs about money and things like that, which one would you advise the listener to sort of be inquisitive about, to ask questions and start learning more of?
That money is just a tool, especially in our society where where our currency as US dollar is actually debt, that there's really no sense in holding on to it in a savings account, because every year you're losing 3 to 6% of its purchasing power. And so money is just a tool. And as physicians, don't be afraid to lose money. You're not going to die. You're not, and I'm not saying be profligate, right? But people imbue the loss of money with so much power, right? That somehow it's this talisman that if I lose a little bit of money, I'm somehow dying. You're not dying. We can always make more, right? Use your money as a tool to improve your life today, not some far off future that you may or may not reach, right? How are you using the money? Listen, you've already sacrificed 8 to 10 hours a day for however many years to make this capital, right? We'll assume you're not going to spend it all on your daily living expenses. You're going to have some excess capital. And I'm talking about even the money you're putting in 401ks and IRAs and all that stuff, right? I'm talking about just excess capital above what it takes for you to live. So before you put a dime in any quote unquote investment. And then ask yourself, really, how is this money helping me today, tomorrow, and then into the far off future, right? What does that look like? Back to that consciousness of using the money as a tool to make your life better, right? For me, it was very early, just buy income producing assets so I can buy my time back so I can do whatever the heck I want to do, right? Other people won't be as draconian as I am because mine was very binary. Either it produced income for me or it didn't. If it didn't produce income, I wasn't buying it, I wasn't investing in it because I knew I wanted to be done at an early age from having to get up and go to work every day, all right? But understand what your mindset is around this capital. We are lulled, especially by the financial services industry, into a set it, forget it, put it away for the future, don't think about it till the future. Well, some of us are not going to make it to the future, right? A physician a day commits suicide, right? Some of us are not going to see the future. So the question then gets to be is, how can you use that capital potentially to help you today? What problems do you have today? Is it, hey, I don't want to go get my laundry. I'm going to go hire somebody to do that. Hey, I don't want to cut my lawn. Hey, I want to bring a nanny in. Hey, you know what? I don't want to work 5 days a week. I'm going to work 4 days a week. So I'll work a little bit less and I'll invest so I can make up that money somewhere else, right? What ways does your capital help you into today? Not just in some future that may or may not come for you. And so to me, that's the biggest kind of mindset issue around money, and understand that it is a fungible tool. It doesn't really exist. It's just a concept that we all have knitted together to exchange value, right? It doesn't really exist. You see the Federal Reserve just hits a button and trillion more and a trillion more and a trillion more, right? So it's not there. It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by anything. So it's just a concept, right? It's a concept that we all have decided that this is what the value is, and you can go and spend it here and there. And so once you understand that it's really not real, it frees you up because we can always make more.
Right. I actually wanted to ask you this earlier, and I just remembered that the sense of the movement. You hear this thing about, in order to make money, you need money and all this stuff. But I've recently, in the last few years, recognized the value of movement of money and just keeping it moving. So it's got the potential, whether it's, a line of credit to go into some real estate and someone do a flip for you. You don't do any of the work. You just keep moving it in places. As much as it feels weird to create the sense of like owing or debt or whatnot, you just being wise in investments, and not that I'm like a guru or anything of that stuff, but it's really phenomenal and amazing how you can move things and let it work for you and create more value for you to do more things later or bring down debts elsewhere. Any thoughts on just how your philosophy on the movement? And you've already kind of touched on it, but just this idea of moving and not holding it and making it work for you.
So if you want to put your tinfoil hat on and go to YouTube and go down a rabbit hole, just put in, it's called currency for a reason, right? Their whole YouTube videos talking about admiralty law and how it works in our society, right? And so you're talking about, people talk about the velocity of money and all these types of things. And now, yes, absolutely. Stagnation gets you nowhere. You put your money in a savings account, you're going to lose money. Guaranteed, not even a question, right? But now you have to ask yourself, what assets are you going to be in that are going to allow you to have that velocity of money, and where your money is going to ultimately multiply, that you can use and do things. And that is where it takes a little bit more thought process around, right? Because all most people do is just throw it in a 401k and call it a day, right? With that, all you're getting is, you hope, capital gains over time, but there's really no ability to leverage it. There's really no ability to move it. There's really no ability to do the types of things that you're talking about, where what you're really talking about is leverage. The use of debt to make money is called leverage, right? It's not debt like credit card debt and consumer debt and those kinds of things, right? And so, but that's a, level 201 course in a level 201 class. Most people have to get out of the mindset of, I'm just going to save this money and squirrel it away and hope that I can get to 59.5 and pull it out, right? And as physicians, most of us will be able to do that. If that's what you want to do, work for 30 years and do that, and hope the money's there and do your 4% withdrawal rule, cool. We all will make enough money that if you have a decent savings rate, you'll get there, very likely. Just hope there's not a big crash or something like that in the stock market, right? What you're talking about is what wealthy people do. Most of them, they only own maybe 25, 30% of their assets are in publicly traded assets. Other than that, they're in private equity, they're in real estate, they're in IP. They act very differently with money than the workaday people. And I always say that there are three levels of people, right? There's what the poor do with money, there's what the middle class does with money, there's what the wealthy do with money, all right? And if you look at kind of how their balance sheets flow, you'll see a marked difference in terms of where money comes from, what money is used for, right? The wealthy use the income from their assets to pay their expenses. The middle class use their labor to pay their expenses, and then they save and invest whatever's left over. And the poor don't have anything, right? They use their income just to live, right? And you don't need tons of money to change how you spend your money, right? I tell people all the time, I spend liberally on assets. I don't spend a whole lot on consumer stuff, right? My assets buy my consumer things. But when I get money, I want to go buy and create as many assets as possible. That I then use the money that comes off those assets to fund my living. Mm-hmm. It's a different twist, right? And it lowers your taxes doing it that way. I mean, there are a million different ways that doing that twist changes your ability to increase the velocity of your money. Because the one thing people don't realize is taxes are our biggest expense, right? And so if you're not investing in a way that can minimize your taxes, if you're not taking advantage of literally the tax code is, 6,000 pages, but only 50 of those pages actually raises revenue and increases taxes. Everything else in there tells you how not to pay the taxes. That's housing other people. That is drilling for oil and energy. That is doing any number of things to not have to pay taxes. People say, oh, those are loopholes. Those are not loopholes. Those are incentive structures. The government has no God-given right to tax money. And they're like, you can keep it if you do these things. So it's not like, oh, we're not getting what we should because these corporations doing X, Y, and Z. Don't get me wrong. There are some corporations who have bastardized the system by capturing kind of the Congress people. Different discussion. But everything in the tax code, we can take advantage of. My investors take advantage of, right? You can find people who do all these things that are perfectly legal. IRS may look at it like, well, as long as you do it exactly correctly, you can take those deductions. And people think that somehow people are cheating. People are not cheating. People are just reading and understanding that they're going to keep their money and do productive things with their money, not just stick it in a mattress. If you do productive things with your money, you don't have to pay taxes on it. And people don't realize that the 401ks and IRAs are not productive in the eyes of the IRS. That's why they're going to tax you when you pull it out at 59.5. But there are ways that we invest that we pay no taxes because we understand what the IRS wants us to do. And so that long-winded answer just to say that the velocity of money should start with taxes. How to minimize your taxes first, because that's your big expense every year.
That is like supreme gold nugget there. I hope everyone really pays attention to that. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was gonna, that's the supreme, right? Because that's an actual item that anybody can take no matter what you're doing. And I'd say the second one you touched on just before you were the level 3 or level 2 kind of aspect of it. It was this idea of seeing money as a tool where what I liked about that was you're saying invest that tool into the highest return for you. That return could be getting a lawn service, getting a nanny. If it provides you and you're buying back your time to do something that provides greater value for it. And that's, that's like a level 1. And that could be learning these investment strategies, learning these tax strategies, developing some sort of asset, side asset that's going to provide you long-term. Because I think it's fascinating that sometimes physicians sometimes we squeeze onto it so much. It's like, I just spent all weekend mowing my lawn. And it's like, did you want to do that? No, I hate it. Well, you could have paid somebody and you could have probably worked an extra hour and done. I mean, it's just so funny how we as physicians have this crazy idea about money.
We're bad, and it's not that, right? I mean, it's that, but it's not, and that's not even a money thing, right? This is that type A in the classroom, always right. If you want a job done right, you do it yourself kind of thing. Not understanding that the wealthiest people build teams. You will never, almost ever become wealthy by yourself. You have to build teams. And my childcare is part of my team. My lawn people are part of my team, right? How do you get out of your own ego way and say that, well, they can't do it as well as I can, so I'm just going to do it. I'm not willing to pay somebody else who's an expert in doing X, Y, or Z. I will figure it out myself. We as physicians are horrible with that. We don't hire consultants in our practices to make them more efficient. The list goes on and on and on and on. And we have to get out of that mentality because we've always been usually the smartest person in the room. In business, you want to be the dumbest person in the room. And so once we're talking about money, that's business, right? So you want people around you who are smarter than you, who are going to then guide you and take your money and put it in places that you don't necessarily have access to. It always kills me. People hire financial planners and these guys are making 75, 80, 100 grand a year. Like, how are you giving your money to people that you make more than, right? It's just, anyway, different discussion for a different day.
Well, that was actually my next question about your team is like, what is your suggestion about how important it is to get a financial advisor or to not be trusting? And we could do another episode later on it.
So it's not that. We can do that very quickly, right? It's not that, right? Because most financial planners are salespeople. They're going to sell you a bunch of products, right? And there's some that aren't. They're RIAs that only take the fee base. But my rule of money is this: if you are not currently financially independent from your own investing, not skimming money from other people, or very close to being so through your own investing efforts, I don't need to talk to you about my money. Now, again, I tend to be draconian with my rules, but my issue is I want to talk to people who I want to emulate. I don't want to talk to people who literally are salespeople.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to figure out kind of how to put a budget together and kind of who might have your insurance policies, and yes, there's a place for a financial advisor for people who are just starting out and really are just like, I don't care about this money thing. I'm going to save enough and I just call it a day. I'm just going to buy some index funds. Cool. There's somebody who can help you from that standpoint. But again, it's hard for me to tell people what to do. I can only tell people what I do. I only talk to people who are wealthier than I am or are financially independent. And because again, I don't care about the total money. What I care about is your ability to be free because you generate enough money to cover your life expenses, right? That could be $30,000 a year, but you're living on your own terms at that point, right? To me, that's more important than sitting there with $1 million, but you're working 300 hours, 200 hours a week, right? So I have a different mindset around that. But I would always say is talk to people about your money that you want to emulate. You want to be like them. You want to be like how they've structured themselves, not necessarily people who are just going to sell you a product.
Well, we're talking to you because we want to be like you.
Yeah, well. I am a work in progress.
Aren't we all? Well, that was fabulous. Kevin, if it's okay, I'll head us out of this episode.
No, absolutely. This was a great episode, and I really hope that people listen just to one or two of the nuggets that are in this particular episode.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to remind people to be open and consider that sometimes learning these things, money is not taught in medical school, as we well know, and we're within a system that can lead us in a direction that's not really teaching us the lessons we need to learn about money. So I hope you open your mind and consider that a lot of these things are truly what the wealthiest and happiest and those that have more freedom, the kind of education that they instill within them or reach from gurus, or you don't have to say gurus, but people that you want to emulate and know a lot more than you do. So thank you again, Dr. Tait, for joining us. And thank you all for joining the Change Physician podcast. And we'll see you on the next episode.
See you, folks.
Thank you so much.